preparing to live stream the meeting. So that's always a good sign. Setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. Done. Wow. Okay. So there's a little bit of feedback. I'll just have to preparing to live stream the meeting. So that's always a good sign.
Yeah, when I say that I got the traffic for the school run, I was trying to book a trip to this morning, and my university is saying that no, you can't book a trip. My trip is going down to London. You know, it's kind of it's not too far, right?
Well, the National Archives are open now in London. Some archives are already open.
Yeah, I know. There's no trip. So, yeah. What's the situation in the US, Michael? Are you allowed to travel?
Yeah. I mean, international travel is still extremely complex. Within
locally.
Within the U.S., you can take planes and such. I haven't. I'm still kind of in fairly conservative mode in terms of my activities, even though I'm vaccinated. I think my children are not vaccinated, so we're still being very careful.
Yeah.
But if you were to here in Los Angeles, when you drive around, you wouldn't know there was a pandemic. In fact, during most of this pandemic, you wouldn't have known there was a pandemic if you just looked at the traffic and the crowds at stores and shopping malls. It was there, especially some moments during the height of everything. And I was flabbergasted sometimes when I would drive by some of these crowded areas and seeing people without masks and just as if there was nothing wrong at all. And so it's quite shocking the level of people's unawareness and inability to take action even during the most dangerous times.
I heard
there are children somewhere.
I've just got a message from Shui Joshua saying that she can't access the meeting, so I might just quickly send her the link again.
Okay, I hope this is not a universal problem.
I also had some problems originally to access because I was trying to access with my BCU email, but I have the Zoom account through my personal account. Because BCU doesn't allow to have a Zoom. So it's all this politics that...
Oh, right. Let me just tell her, please don't use your BCU email.
Whatever email she has, get the account in Zoom. So I'm unsure. But
whatever BCU implemented nowadays, sorry, for people that don't know BCU is Birmingham City University.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it reminds me the Communist Party authority. You know, it's kind of top down. You don't argue. You know, when some of my artists and artwork being censored in various exhibitions, and I was trying to argue with the director of the museums, and they said, no, you don't argue, don't even ask, please. And I said, okay, hands up, full stop, that's it. So that's the reality, and I think it's interesting. No, I'm not being sarcastic. I mean it, saying this is interesting, that for us who are not inventing any medicines, and who are not helping with the NHS, sorry, National Health Service, we have to think aloud, you know, and make alternative strategies to tackle on various issues. So yeah, so do we wait for a few minutes, Lauren? You've got the list of our guests.
Yeah, so we had about 26 people sign up, and we've got 15 people here. Do we have? Let me just check how YouTube's going at the moment. And we've got 9 people watching on YouTube as well. So, what do you think? Should we make a start?
Yeah, I think we can make a start. I think the essence of this is that we trying to squeeze something out from our guest speaker, Xiang, Biao, and Micheal. I'm personally very keen to continue the discussion with Xiang, Biao, and Micheal, certainly that we've got a lot of curiosities there to think about your project, and in particular when you are working with the Chinese authorities and Fang in particular as an independent writer. So yeah, Lauren, you will start.
Thank you so much. And sorry if anyone had some technical difficulties, as Joshua just explained, vis-a-vis Birmingham City's Zoom policy. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this launch, this book launch celebrating the release of The Otherness of the Everyday, edited by Professor Jiehong Jiang, comprising 12 conversations with personalities from the art world in China. We're also joined by two distinguished guests today. Firstly, Professor Xiang Biao, a social anthropologist affiliated with the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, as well as Oxford University. Biao was the first participant in Jiang Jiehong's original seminar series of 12 conversations, which were hosted in Chinese via the online platform of Bilibili. His talk crashed our Zoom facilities and attracted over 16,000 views. We're also joined by Professor Micheal Berry, translator of Fang Fang's highly influential Wuhan Diary. I believe that Micheal worked at lightning speed to translate over 5,000 words a day into English from Chinese, so a global audience could read about Fang Fang's experiences under lockdown. Similarly, we have similar aspirations for Professor Joshua Jiang's edited volume, which was translated also from Chinese into English. We hope, therefore, that this book publication will make Chinese perspectives on and reactions to the pandemic accessible to a global audience. I suppose then I wanted to begin by very much anchoring ourselves in the present day and considering China's post-COVID relationship to the world, particularly vis-a-vis countries that are still experiencing severe outbreaks of the viruses. Unfortunately, we can still see to this very day on the news. It seems to me that some of the conversations that were elaborated in Otherness are still highly relevant. So Joshua, do you want to sort of start us off with that in mind?
You mean the initial idea of this project?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think in terms of the initial thought of the project is simpler than it became what it became, because in the very beginning I was very concerned about the students' experience, particularly MA and PhD students within the Center for Chinese Visual Arts last year, more or less the similar time now. I mean, in March and April, when 23rd of March is the lockdown order by the Prime Minister in the UK. And therefore I thought, well, when we can't meet with face-to-face, we might well reach out to the other parts of the globe to to invite colleagues to join in for conversation. And I was also thinking, you know, it might be interesting to have someone who is not necessarily working in the art design field of study, because what we can do as artists and designers during the pandemic is very limited. And therefore this kind of crafts a particular opportunity for us to reach out in various parts of the world and to welcome different voices from different disciplines and subject area. So we start off with an anthropologist who works in Oxford as a professor of social anthropology. That was planned, I think, in March, April last year. And it was it was really interesting because I didn't know Xiang Biao until somebody saying that, Joshua, you need to look at Shi San Yao with Xu Zhiyuan. So I watched that with great interest, and I thought that could be interesting because in that particular piece, Xiang Biao was talking about the nearby, talking about the mobility, touch upon various issues. And I thought those issues must have changed dramatically during the lockdown and pandemic. And what's his view now? I mean, that's something that accelerate my curiosity to learn more from his research and his work. And then we are moving to various discussions with actually 12 scholars across different disciplines. I did have written somewhere in the book, in the introduction, about the methodology of the research and how we select the participants. One of the criteria is that they must come from very different discipline areas. So we've got one artist only, that's Zhang Pei Li, one museum director, that's Zhang Zikang, and one curator, that's Pi Li, and also musicians and so on. So that was a really interesting and a challenging, actually, experience for us. And I hope that our students enjoyed the conversations. And each conversations, we attracted a lot of audience. Bilibili seems to be more powerful than YouTube to some extent. But it's really interesting that it was starting off from the 6th of June and all the way until September. We really enjoyed the process until the original book proposal was censored by Chinese government, and Intellect, Yelena in Intellect saved us from this difficult scenario. And although she kindly offered an opportunity for us to translate the whole lot from Chinese to English, and that's also, and I thought it would be a burden, because I myself, I'm not trained as a translator, although I speak both languages, but I never translate. The more you stay in the UK, the more you feel that translation is completely impossible in many circumstances. And Michael will disagree with me as a translator, but we will consult his view later. But overall, this originally starting from a sort of a research seminar series and moving on to a transcription, editorial process into Chinese publication, agreed by a Chinese publisher, only 3 days away from contract signing. And they've got a telephone call from the authority saying that nothing in relation to pandemic can be published. And I was unsure because they are talking about a telephone call, which means that there's no written evidence whatsoever. And until I realized by talking to a number of colleagues in China that they do issue telephone calls like this to say, this is a red line that you please don't touch. So that's interesting, and I know that Fang Ruji experienced some same or similar experience, and it's our privilege that to have Professor Michael Berry with us today from the US, and we all of us, not just three of us, can share our experience today. And I thought I should stop here for now. It's a very brief introduction for the project. And I'm very pleased that the book has now physically printed. I show you. That's all the way from Georgia, from the Intellect, sent it to me, very nicely printed. And it's super quick. You know, we started the editorial translational process in October, November. We finished off the first draft by Christmas, and it's now physically printed. And I know that Yelena and Intellect, they are very keen to make this happen. And they created a sort of, I used to call it fast track, because usually you go onto the airplane, if you got a sort of a plastic card, you can go through this fast track. I forgot this experience now. But this is the fast track for a book publication. And I can see that Fang's diary, including translation and publication process, is very quick as well. I mean, maybe that's because of the, it's a topical sort of issue that for us to think about. And this is such a moment that we can gather together to reflect what we have achieved and what was the challenge forthcoming.
Would either Micheal or Biao like to respond to that at all?
Well, yeah, if it's okay, I just, because I was part of the project, right? I was very honored to be the first participant in the seminar series. I think what Joshua just mentioned, this brief life history of this project is very touching, and it is very revealing as well. COVID is a very special historical event, at least for me, in the sense that during this process of COVID, of course, I mean, the infection itself changed and up and down, but the people's perspectives changed so dramatically, and including the emotion, the mood, and also all kind of ideological lines shift not only fast, but shift, you know, it's often from one extreme to another. I became very particularly interested or concerned with that pandemic, not because the pandemic itself, but it was around late February, when there was a debate whether or not the WHO would announce this as a pandemic. I mean, the political scientists were debating, you know, debating about the influence that China had over the UN system. They will say, okay, probably WHO would not dare to announce it as a pandemic because of the influence of China. So that was an interesting topic in itself. But what is more intriguing to me was that around March, you can see people's, the analytical framework was, you know, the previous analytical framework was really challenged. Because in January and February, everything happened in China was often explained through the Chinese system. You have cover up, you have this inadequate development of grassroots healthcare system, and you have this too rigid hierarchy within this disease reporting system, etc. Right? It's explained very well. But when it became global, then people discovered, okay, lots of things that we thought that is China specific and which is responsible for the pandemic actually exists in many other parts of the world. And so therefore the traditional thinking that attribute anything specific to a overarching political system did not explain very well. And at the same time, lots of things that we thought is not so significant, at least politically. For example, you know, the penetration rate of the internet and the level of e-commerce, the development level of e-commerce and the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, such as a road and etc., and the logistics system. turned out to be very consequential during this pandemic, right? So that make me, then you basically, the social analysis, the social researchers, social analysts have to develop a new line of thinking. As Joshua just mentioned, the project started with something quite simple idea, because students can't travel, so one talk more. But in this process, because of all this development, because of people's debates, actually the project become richer and richer. It's not always in the nice sense. Huh? When the topic become richer, also become emotionally more charged and became ideologically more divided. Of course, today we know, the COVID is becoming long COVID, and lots of fundamental questions certainly remain unsolved, and it will remain unsolved, and will remain to be painful and divisive debates, I think, in coming years, if not the coming decades to come, right? Particularly, how shall we understand the nature and the merit of democracy vis-a-vis so-called authoritarian regime, or even whether or not we should have a new definition about the democracy, about authoritarianism, etc. So I think this the COVID is in many senses is quite a unique historical event and a unique pandemic, because this is for one thing, this is the first pandemic that is monitored on the global scale, moment to moment. So therefore, this is why it became so emotionally charged, and it's become deeply cultural, right? You have all this information and the symbols flowing or flooding our life, yet sometimes we cannot have a rational interpretations about everything. So our response is often very visceral and bodily and ideological. So therefore we have to draw in lots of our cultural repertoire somewhere to put the things in order. So probably in this sense, the COVID is very unique, and the value, this makes this book have a special value. This book is certainly not an end. It is an end of a result of the 12 seminars, but it should be a starting point of the next stage of conversation, which would be even deeper and even probably more important conversation. Yeah, this I'm just thinking the project as a life itself.
Thank you very much, Biao, for those excellent reflections. I'm remembering, in fact, your own contribution to the seminar series, and I think you'd already, even at the very beginning of the pandemic, applied some of your own theory to what was happening in the midst of COVID-19, and that was the state of suspension, this interminable, sense of waiting that was caused by the pandemic. And I think that that's something that Fang Fang also documents firsthand, social media being the only real connection to the outside world. And this sense of waiting, managed to give rise to human interaction. So I was wondering if Micheal wanted to come in here and explain, that sort of visceral sense of human contact that social media enabled, thanks to Fang Fang, although there was a lot of censorship, being able to post her diary out into the World Wide Web. Micheal here? Hello, Micheal?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you now, yeah.
So thank you, Lauren, for having me. Patient. Able, my connection?
Oh, we can see you now, yeah.
Okay, great. So congratulations to Jiehong on this incredible document that you've produced. And I even the title, the otherness of the everyday, I think on the one hand, it just speaks to this uncanny surrealness, right, of what everyone is experiencing during COVID with the empty streets and the strangeness that has kind of slipped into the everyday. But I think the otherness also speaks to what could have been a common experience to bring people together, right? Because we all globally, we all went through COVID, actually has become a vehicle through which this otherness has become exacerbated politically and created more political friction. And as Xiang Biao was mentioning, part of, I think, what we've been seeing is that government's response to COVID wasn't just relegated to how their performance on that matter was rated, but it became a kind of unofficial referendum on which political system was better, and eventually that's led to probably one of the greatest moments in the last several decades for giving the Chinese Communist Party more kind of capital, political capital to go forward. And there are probably more younger generation people in China, post-90s generation, there's been an incredible surge of patriotism, nationalism, pride, and satisfaction on their government's performance. And with that, a kind of connected directly to that is also a way in which a lot of young people have completely lost faith in the West and in, say, democratic Western countries like the United States and Great Britain, et cetera. And so COVID has played out in a lot of strange ways, like I don't think anyone could have anticipated. And as you mentioned, my lens through a lot of this started with Fang Fang's Wuhan diary. And I think, like Jiehong, it sounds like when you started your project, it was also out of a sense that we're not frontline medical workers, we're not doctors, but at least I felt an incredible need to do something, to contribute to. And amid that sense of helplessness, I had students who were trying to raise donations of PPE. I was organizing forums on campus here in Los Angeles about COVID-19, but it still felt like it just wasn't enough. And I was fortunate that I knew Fang Fang because I was translating one of her novels. And once her diary started to become through all of the different voices that were playing out. Of course, we had official media responses, we had independent media, we had so many different perspectives on the initial outbreak in Wuhan, but somehow Fang's diary, which was, as Lauren kind of hinted at, it was a viral diary. It was played out on social media, originally on the social media platform of Weibo, later migrated in part to WeChat. Somehow, through those platforms, able to generate such a massive group of readers that would consolidate around this diary. It started with a few million readers, and eventually we were getting 20, 30, up to 50 million readers as it was continuing. And it sounds like someone's not muted. I'm wondering, maybe the moderator can mute those not speaking. And so the diary started generating more and more attention. And like you said, it almost said something about also our engagement with reality and vis-a-vis this virtual space and vis-a-vis the so-called real world. There were a lot of accusations against Fang Fang that her diary was illegitimate because she wasn't a frontline worker. She was not somebody who was out there, in the streets and meeting with people. She was quarantined in her diary, just in her apartment, just like everybody else. And she very forcefully argues that, no, this is the site, this is the front line. And being here quarantined in Wuhan, in my apartment, this is just as much a legitimate experience as those people in the hospital and everywhere else. It's a different experience. But and while she's in her apartment, she's getting all this information through Weibo, through texts, and so this kind of virtual connection that Lauren, your initial question asked about, I think became a primary vehicle through which not just Fang Fang, but almost everybody was encountering the pandemic. And that also ties into the fact that this wasn't just a biological crisis, but it was also a internet crisis in a sense, because we saw very quickly what happened in China, not just with Fang Fang, but with various other individuals. It triggered an entire maelstrom of disinformation, fake news, internet attacks, death threats, viral attacks. And we quickly saw this interaction and interplay between discourse around the pandemic and viral internet discourse that was playing out. And it may have seemed early on that it was isolated to China, but very quickly, if we followed 2020, these all became some of the major keywords of the year, right? Disinformation, conspiracy theory, fake news, and they were all playing out right there alongside COVID-19. I know here in the United States, certainly, and I think in many other countries. And so in some ways, Fang Fang's account was not just a initial account or a first look at what happened, but I think it was also quite prophetic because it pinpointed the intersection between COVID-19 and racism, COVID-19 and disinformation campaigns, so many, this US-China trade tension, or new Cold War, which had been playing out. Fang Fang never writes about it, but the way it was pulled into that in a conspiratorial framework also speaks to what would play out on a global scale as things move forward.
Thank you so much for that reflection. I'm really drawn to the use in both Fang Fang's diary and speakers who were part of the otherness of the everyday of this idea as virus as metaphor. Fang Fang sometimes makes allusions to, a N95 mask, saving her from social media. And Chen Danqing in the otherness of the everyday states that the real virus is in fact racism. So as you say, it wasn't just a biological virus. Joshua, did you want to talk a little bit more about the virus as metaphor, or Biao perhaps? Oh, Joshua, you're muted. Let me just.
Yeah, Chen Danqing is a special guest, one of the special guests, and we approached him soon after Xiang Biao's talk, and he declined the invitation. And for the second round, we tried again, and I simply say that I spoke in Chinese, in Shanghainese with him, and I said, 我们心不死, we try again to see whether you would talk about something. But his focus is exceptional, and this was not something that I would expect from him, actually. I thought he will coming in from a scholar, either as an artist or as a writer, but he was talking about something in terms of media communication, and he was talking about two Chinese words. One is 传播 and 传染, which is infection or communication, basically. So I think his point of view is that we are and the key problem with the pandemic is not necessarily to do with the virus itself. It's to do with the communication, and when we are all living in a time that we relying on social media and information going through the internet, and how do we receive and how do we digest those information, and how do we transform and translate, not necessarily linguistically, let's say reinterpret those information, passing on to the others. And I think this is the disease itself, and he thought this is the disease itself. And we've been through all that, and when we see those informations online, people will find difficult to tell whether this is true or false. My wife will simply say, check the BBC first. But who knows BBC? What BBC says is correct. That's another thing. But it's I used to always go to see this something called C readers, 万维读者. I don't know whether colleagues will see that. And when I get some information, I know during this pandemic a year ago, my daughter, who is now in the audience, she will say that, are you taking this information from your stupid credits net? She called it credits net. I said, yes, don't believe it. So that's the scenario that we are living in. And how do we position ourselves with this scenario, with so many, various informations and disinformations, Feng Feng's diary is a particular example when people writing down, and it's to do with the truth and the false, and it's in the form of diary. Although I understand that she herself didn't call it as a diary. I mean, she just write it every day rather than as a diary. I mean, a diary should be private, and diary shouldn't be open to the public, apart from the 雷锋日记, 雷锋 diary. That's for propaganda. That's another thing. But other than that, diary is a diary. But in terms of information, disinformation, Michael might like to share more about this.
Yes, and indeed, that's been kind of one of the chief coordinates in the whole controversy surrounding Feng Feng's account, is this notion of truth and lies. And actually, once Feng Feng was targeted, one of the primary items that they came after her for was the allegation that what she was writing was in fact lies. And they call her the Witch of Lies. They call her the diary the Book of Lies. These are just some of the ways in which it's been framed. And of course, she's not a journalist. She's not using proper citation when she's dealing with sources. But actually, if you read the diary throughout, she is always referring to her sources as my friend, my neighbor, my doctor friend. This is how she refers to her sources. And that became a major target among the trolls, that, see, it's all hearsay. It's all rumors that she's relaying. In actuality, there's a real clear reason why she chose to do that. And that's because she had already been targeted by these trolls at the very start of the diary. In fact, in 2017, Feng Feng first became the target of internet trolls. And that group that targeted her in 2017 is the same group that came after her in 2020 when she began her diary. And so she knew that one of the tactics of the trolls is witch hunt tactics, whereby they actually go after those who support her, those who speak out in her defense. And so her not revealing the names of these individuals was really a protectionist tactic in order to, in hopes that those individuals would not also be targeted. And it's ironic that precisely because she was trying to protect them, it opened herself up to even more of this kind of attack. And it created a vicious cycle wherein, I mean, there were times I gave an interview to Radio France International to try to correct a lot of the rumors and lies. And it was posted in Chinese, the interview on Weibo. It got, I think, 340,000 views within 3 hours, and then it was harmonized, and swiped from the internet. And then a new wave of trolls started to attack the interview, claiming that was lies and that was rumors and hearsay. And so you get into this very surreal situation where, and it's actually exactly the same playbook that Donald Trump appropriated when so-called real news outlets would cover his lies, and he would call those fake news. And so you get into this vicious circle, which you can't escape from. And so in confronting this kind of a biosphere of conspiracy theories, you have to be very careful about how you're going to approach that. And so I think there was always the tendency to perhaps go on Weibo and try to argue with them, but that's just getting in the mud and rolling around, and you're never going to win that battle, especially when there's tens of thousands of these trolls that are actively attacking. And so I tried to take a different tactic, which was, I wrote afterword to the diary where I tried to set the record straight. I later wrote a monograph kind of dissecting the entire controversy surrounding this book, and also writing op-eds and in reputable news outlets trying to put forth an alternative perspective that would hopefully correct some of the lies that were proliferating online. But it's extremely difficult when voices in support of Fang Fang were systematically being censored and removed, and especially the social media platform of Weibo just became the land of the trolls, and their lies just proliferated, and it was very difficult to get forward an alternative perspective. And that also skews the public's perception because they're exposed to only one side of what's happening. And you can't blame average people for believing, Fang Fang is this profiteer or someone who betrayed her country and all of the other accusations, when that's all they're hearing, that's all they're exposed to. And after now a year of this campaign, I think there's quite a few people in China now who have accepted that official line that's been so deeply pushed for the last several months.
Thank you so much, Micheal, for expanding upon that. I think that what's really interesting, if I may, is that we, obviously with Fang Fang's diary, there's this sort of, hate being, generated online, whereas there were indeed disagreements actually on the otherness of the everyday in terms of official versus, shall we say, Minjian or folk dialogues, but they were conducted in a highly civilized way, I would say. I mean, Joshua, did you want to come in on sort of talking a bit more about the disparate views? I mean, I remember Jiang very much followed, the Chinese government line, and quite rightly commended saturated rescue as the tactic working to help the whole country, helping the response in Wuhan. And this is something that Fang Fang also praises as well. Fang Fang does praise the government in some parts of her diary as well, when praise is due. So I wondered if you just wanted to talk about some of the differences of opinion that were present in the otherness of the everyday. Oh, Joshua, you're on mute again.
Oh, sorry. I think we managed to provide not only the voices from different disciplines, but also they are culturally and politically different as well, let alone not although they are all speaking Chinese. So I appreciate some colleagues coming from quite a different voice, and which to me is a surprise. But this is important to be included in the conversation. The conversation is sort of generative in a way. For example, that one of our participants are here, Xiang Biao, that we didn't had a rehearsal beforehand. We just move on to talk about. We did, however, to have some substantial editorial work after the conversation, which is also methodologically important. Because what we talk about and what we write about, the density of the information is different. And also the video as well, when we have this video edited and put on YouTube and Bilibili, and when we re-edit the conversation into a specific density, and you translate it into English, that's another thing to talk about. And I think Xiang Biao mentioned about the different views and political stance as well, and perhaps he would like to share more about this.
So Joshua is a very good, I don't know the English word, in the playing basketball, you move one ball from one side to another. Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to respond to the question about information, disinformation, and also infodemic, right? This actually is a word used by the UN and the WHO. Infodemic is not only pandemic, but also have infodemic. Why is there infodemic? I mean, on the surface, it's simply because we have too much information. In a way, it is not too difficult to understand. When you have a large amount of information, of course, you have diverse type of information. And the feelings that we suffered from infodemic, I think there are probably 3 reasons. It's just what I'm thinking now. Number one is that there's a very peculiar relation that we experienced during the pandemic between information, emotion, and the judgment. In theory, once you receive a piece of information is simply a data to tell you something happened in the world, including particular person or particular view. This is just a piece of information. But somehow during the pandemic, many people feel compelled to make judgment, value judgment. And then this value judgment is deeply connected to certain emotional register, emotional feelings. So this became contagious, right? It's only when information acquire certain ethical quality and therefore certain emotive quality, information become viral, become virus. So that is the first question we have to think, and why the information. I mean, I feel very lucky being anthropologist actually during the pandemic, because when I see all these very divided views, being anthropologists, we treat them just as information. I mean, this is not really to distance ourselves from reality, but this is how we approach the world. What is the most interesting thing for us is that different views exist. Then you look at the composition and the relations between different views, right? And then it becomes analytical. But somehow the large section of society lost that capacity of turning emotion and value into information, and rather they are all kind of drawn in to this momentum that turn information into quick value judgment and emotional response. Number 2 reason why we feel infodemic, I mean, actually this is analysis from the UN and the WHO again, which I agree with, which is that part of the reason that we have infodemic is because of the breakdown of chain of trust. When you live in a society, in everyday life, where you have a chain of trust, or a network of trust. For example, employees can trust the employers. If there's lots of information going around outside, they will come to their factories or their shops and to discuss with the colleagues and with the employers. So they will find a piece of information which they think, okay, by and large, probably is true. And more importantly, it is most consequential and meaningful, because what the employee and the colleagues believe is true is socially most important to you. I mean, if we are thinking in the kind of Fordist old working relation, right? You have stable relations with your colleagues, your employers. So that social relations means certain regime of truth, using Foucault's a term, certain social milieu where truth can be established. We know there is no absolute truth. Truth is a social product. The problem that we face today is that that kind of social milieu of producing convincing truth for you in a particular context has lost. So what is a social milieu now to produce and to contest the truth is a supposedly endless universal social media. It is a global platform. Everyone can have anyone to say. I mean, this is partly because the technology of social media, but more importantly, because the breakdown of the tangible material social relations that we live in. People have no employers to turn to. I mean, the relation with the colleagues. I mean, the middle class, probably professionals, they have colleagues to discuss. This may be very important. I mean, Micheal, Joshua, and me, we don't feel so scared, partly because we have colleagues to discuss. I mean, we don't know what's really going on, but we at least know what's going on in the university. And we take a certain informed actions about our own life. I mean, we are not responsible, we cannot be responsible for the world, but at least we can be responsible for our students and colleagues. Like Joshua organized this seminar series. It was for his own students to start with, right? So that kind of mirror, but for many people, they did not exist anymore. So therefore, the social media became so powerful. It's not because the technology itself is powerful, because there's a huge vacuum. The breakdown of chain of trust, the breakdown of organic social milieu where truth, social truth, can be established. Then everything became ideological. It became, all the debates are very ideological charge. You always very grand principles, very abstract symbols and ideals, right? Rather than talking about, okay, what is really going on in my neighborhood, and everything happening in the neighborhood will be elevated into certain abstract symbolic value. So I think that is a second point about the infodemic. And the third point is what Micheal just suggested. It's very interesting. He talked about the waves. So you have one wave of opinions sweeping through social media, and then it's like a tide. I mean, of course, it's not natural. It's someone behind this, engineered that, the waves. So I think the wave of metaphor is interesting, especially when we consider it in relation to the metaphor of chain or channel. In normal circumstances, we learn our information through channel. Channels are specific, close to you, meaning the relation between you and someone you know. Right? So it is not only a channel for information transmission, but is also a channel of interaction and interpretation. Channels gone, waves come in. When we lose a channel in our hands, of course, now we are swept away by waves. Now we are all little, the little dots of water, drops of water in huge waves. So it's a very interesting, it really makes me thinking, I don't know whether or not we have information specialists in the audience. So the whole entire, of course, information science is tied to the notion of channel, right? Is Claude de Shannon, the classical, the mathematical understanding on information is related to the notion of channel. Sorry, I'm not thinking going more wild, but I'm just thinking from a more social perspective. When the channels are replaced by waves, what is the technological reason, the process behind that, and what is the social and the political consequences of that? And that for me is a quite fascinating question. Yeah. So it's a problem. So that what I want to say is that it's not only truth or not the truth, but they have to look at the social practical processes with which certain truths can emerge, and we just lost the capacity of establishing social truths.
Certainly, Biao, I think that's an excellent reflection on, I think we're certainly living in the age of truth pluralism, as it were. And I think that's an excellent note on which to welcome a plurality of views from our audience members who are joining us via Zoom. So if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to either unmute your mic, turn on your video, or you can pose questions to Jiehong, Micheal, Biao. You can write questions in the chat bar, or we can keep discussing. It's very much up to you. So I don't know if anyone from the audience would like to come in at this juncture. Do we have anyone from the audience? No?
Hello, sorry.
Oh, hello.
Hi, hello, Joshua. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
We can't see you either. Could you please, what's your name? Sorry, could you please turn on your video and mic?
It's Jiang. Oh, right. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, the voice was very low. Is it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a shame.
Is it better now?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, it's better
Right.
now.
Yeah. Thank you for organizing this. It's really, really. Thank you for all those insightful comments and observations. I have a question for Micheal. I'm not quite familiar with about the trolling of Fang Wang Weibo, so I found it fascinating when you said Weibo becomes such a hotbed of lies and the trolls. And you also mentioned that the trolling of Fang started long before the COVID started. So I just wonder, could you tell us more about the trolling of Fang, why, how it started, why, what's the motivation of those trolls? That would be really great. I'd be really grateful. Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to flesh that out a little bit. So in 2016, Fang published a novel in Chinese called Ran Mai, or Soft Burial. It was a historical work of historical fiction set against the land reform movement during the early, basically early 50s. And the land reform movement has always been looked upon by the CCP as one of those fundamental cornerstone political movements that helped legitimize their power. And over the course of 20th century history, the CCP has lost a lot of their movements, so to speak, right? The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, the anti-rightist movement, all of these have been kind of negated over time, or at least the evils or faults of those historical movements have been shown through. The land reform movement, however, is one such movement that is still very much embraced as something that can't be touched, because it was it was instrumental in kind of cementing the CCP's power. Anyway, so Fang in 2016 publishes a novel that deals with the land reform movement, but it does so in what pro-government figures look at as a revisionist manner. That is, she takes the perspective of the victims of the land reform movement, the landowners or their family members, and looks at how they suffered during that period. That's not to say she's trying to topple history. She's simply showing from a humanistic perspective that there's many different ways we can look at that history. However, it became targeted for attack. The attacks became so loud and so venomous that eventually the novel, after winning a major literary award, the Biao Prize, was actually banned and taken off bookshelves and kind of swiped from the internet. And so that was the beginning. And then those trolls continued to hound Fang starting in 2017. And in 2020, when this diary started to go viral, the first couple of individuals to criticize the diary, to target it, were in fact the same individuals that had been targeting her since 2017. And so that you can very clearly trace the origin of this. And mostly these, there were retired PLA officers. There were a lot of these kind of old cadres that were attacking her early on. But it's the way viruses work. It's like a parasite. You need a host. And with Wuhan Diary getting 20, 30, 50 million viewers online, it became a very powerful host, and it allowed these parasites to multiply and gain more and more influence. And it became kind of a perfect storm, so to speak. And also, as this was playing out in 2020, China-US relations were shifting dramatically. The COVID-19 situation was transforming very quickly. And that created an environment through which the trolls were able to really gain an almost unprecedented following and allow their voice to be amplified, and then eventually actually picked up by a lot of official government organs. And so you see the Global Times and other official media outlets parroting some of the arguments that the trolls are making, and it just grows exponentially.
Thank you so much for your question, Yen. Do we have any other audience members who would like to ask a question?
Since we are waiting for questions, I thought there are art and design students here and PhDs here, and this is something that I received a discussion. I had a discussion with a painter recently, actually in the last couple of days, talking about her show, and you know, when we're talking about show, I mean, personally, I hate online exhibitions, and I think this is the least imaginative thing that people can ever think of, and this is almost it's wrong thing to do, particularly for painting, and for let alone for sculpture and installations. But the pandemic actually bring us to think about the role of something, the role of those events and things that we used to it in our normality. And for example, exhibition is one of those things. And when pandemic arrives, and within this, because I work as a curator and work in the art field, and exhibition is such an important event in the field. When this is no longer primarily possible, you know, to be held. I mean, I don't know whether this year we'll have a Venice Biennale, because it's almost criminal if you within the, you know, the whole world is suffering from this virus disease, and you're holding what, an art festival to celebrate art. I mean, this is almost wrong to do so, and without exhibitions and without those art fairs and festivals or whatever, does art still can art still be considered meaningful, you know? And possibly, you know, in the previous days, the exhibition has played a role too important in a way, because I mean, the history of his exhibition itself is not too long. It's less than 200 years, right? We are talking about, let's say, from Impressionism in the early 19th century, and we coming towards this kind of biennial, triennials that we see every day in galleries and art fairs, everything. And as if that art cannot exist without an exhibition. But when this pandemic arrives and there's no exhibition, and I think it's almost, I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't go to an opening with my masks on, can't have a glass of champagne. This is almost, what's the point, you know, go there and you don't see people smile, and you don't have the same experience. And how do we, particularly those curators and curating students in the curating department, how can we still working on exhibitions or a particular form of exhibitions to support art and to support the communication through art or recognition through art? And this is something, you know, from my area of research, I would really be interested in to explore further. And I'm sure that this similarly happening to, let's say, music. You know, I know that some of our postdocs in our conservatoire, Birmingham Conservatoire, Royal Birmingham Conservatoire, are suffering to extend their contract because of the lockdown and the loss of you know, opportunities of performance and so on. And and also people doing sports. We only have a certain years and period of time in your lifetime can do that. And this pandemic give us this sort of vacuumed space to think about, these kind of, we thought that's usual, we took it for granted, and how do we envisage this everyday life? And that's one of the points that we raised in the book as well, about the otherness.
Thank you very much for that, Joshua. I think that there's a sort of another exchange of views on online exhibitions as Jiang that's really exciting to read in the book as well, vis-a-vis digital exhibitions versus in situ exhibitions as well. And we've got a final question then from Yan Wu for Xiang Biao. I'll just read it out. I really appreciate your points on the breakdown of the chain of trust argument. On the other hand, I wonder if the information void is the main reason for the viral spread of misinformation. It seems to me that elites had great potential in influencing public opinion and could facilitate the dissemination of misinformation. What is your view of the powerful opinion leaders during the COVID-19 crisis of misinformation?
Very good question.
Yes. So I mean, can I respond to what Joshua just said earlier? Yeah. Probably 2 or 3 points. Number one is about artists as not a migrant labor, but as a mobile labor. Musicians are the type of person who have to be mobile all the time because people want to see live performance. So as a sports person, I mean, I work on migration and labor. So often we think of migrant labor, the factory workers and people in the plantation or domestic helpers. Actually, we often forget artists are mobile labor. And so therefore, their livelihoods, not only artistic creation, but livelihoods has been under stress during the pandemic. So we are wanted to work on one small concept called the mobile livelihoods, including beggars, sex workers. Sex workers have to move around in order to, keep their value not depreciated. You always need to be new. And the artists. So we have a wide range of people whose livelihoods are reliant on mobility. So that is, as Joshua said, it's actually COVID really shed a sharp light on this. Second, about exhibition, then we also have a concept to work with now. I call it mobility event. So exhibition itself is an event based on mobility. Artists and also the viewers and the curators come from different places. They move, travel, and they gather, they mingle, and they disperse, right? And the music festival, of course, is even more obvious, more concentrated mobility event, which to some extent became so-called super spreader. This is particularly controversial in the country where I am now, Germany. This musical festival and the carnivals were canceled, but actually it means a great deal for people here. So the cancellation has been controversial. And then why do we need this type of mobility event? This is a big question, but just in the art world, Joshua asked, the exhibition itself is probably less than 200 years old. So I think that is a fascinating question. I suppose, a very superficial answer from me as a layperson, certainly it has to do with commercialization of art and the democratization of art and politics. When you did not have exhibition, how do you establish the value of a piece of art? Of course, the patronage. You have patron from court and etc. So, and also the circulation of art was very limited. You don't have the market and this auction and etc. So exhibition I don't know. I don't know about the history, but I'm thinking it's not only an artistic activity. It has lots to do with the market. I mean, you go certain exhibition, art festival. We know all the film and all this festival is to establish your artistic value, which is immediately translated into market value. And actually, it is market value is driving, sustain all this mobility event. So now that comes to the question, when we don't have this physical exhibition, when we lose even temporarily the physical mechanisms through which we establish an artistic / market value of artworks, what will happen? How will the market function? How this evaluation system works? I think it's a very interesting question to me. So the mobility event, it has its own political economy behind. So I mentioned these little two concepts, mobile livelihoods and the mobility events. We have other notions that we want to work with. And all these concepts now are being developed under one project called Mobility Lab, and we have an inventory. I will probably later put the link here. I really want, if you are interested, I'm now promoting it. We just started this project, need inputs from people from all walks of life. So this is a kind of open science project. We need everyone to become researcher, to report what happened around them and to contribute analysis. I mean, also Joshua asked to talk about methodology of art curation under COVID. Anthropologists face a similar problem because we can't travel, we can't do field work, we can't interview people. I mean, this is the basic type of work we do. We are also mobile labor and we can't move. What do we do? One way of, alternative way of doing research is to invite the public to become anthropologists themselves. Encourage them to write ethnographic reflections about their observation, right? So, I mean, we don't have not seen any result yet, but that is one way of moving forward. So therefore, this mobility lab inventory really wanted to become open science experiment in this way. And there's a question regarding information and opinion leaders, and it's a wonderful question. So this really goes to the sociology of information, right? We don't look at information just as something given. Information is by definition always socially organized. So what is opinion leader? Opinion leader is a particular way how we organize information, a particular structure, how information acquires certain meaning. So whether or not there's a void, there's a breakdown of chain of trust is an important cause, I still think so. Otherwise, how do we explain the rise of opinion leaders? The person is, for young people, this probably are celebrities, people who have some desirable or even not so desirable, but somehow the attention-seeking lifestyle, they become opinion leaders. So the opinion leaders did not become opinion leaders because they have done anything remarkable or their analysis is particularly sharp. So that itself, I think, is a result of the social void of what I call the information channels, right? Then it give way to waves. I mean, we don't have time going to the history. Even during the pre-reform era, probably in height of political mobilization, that may be exception. I'm thinking with China. People's opinions, of course, are very much colored by state ideology, but nevertheless, people like the party secretary of the work unit still is very important. And often the person of the so-called trade union leaders, 工会主席. I mean, we know it's no genuine trade union in China even now, but the people like that, they have certain authority among the workers because they, work very hard and they set a model. People will follow them. I mean, if you are a selfish and corrupt leader, then you cannot be opinion leaders. Even during that time, opinion is supposedly heavily colored by state propaganda. Still, you have that kind of a milieu, social milieu, in which you develop a meaning about your social life. So, I mean, certainly I'm not justifying that historical experiences, but I'm just wanted to emphasize a key sociological differences between now and before. Probably is not the availability of social media and the communication technology, but rather is a lack, the disappearance of the social terrain, the organic social relations with which we acquire meanings about information.
Thank you very much, Biao. We've got another question from Anna Laura. Thank you to all the speakers for this great book launch. I've already ordered my copy. I wanted to add a point about the importance of thinking about inequalities in this context, in the sense of access to healthcare and more recently vaccines, in the sense of unequal effects on work, in the sense of uneven vulnerability between populations, BME communities in the UK, for instance, and in the sense of an uneven availability of academics to participate in debate at this moment, given caring duties, something I found particularly frustrating. Would anyone like to respond to Anna Laura's comments here? I think in terms of vaccine inequality, that's very much something that we've seen recently with the horrific images that have emanated from India. Biao, I know you've done some field work in India. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So about sorry, I just want to send the link to everybody.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, so please check out. I'll be very excited. Yeah, we also have a Twitter, so please follow. We have, I mean, the latest I sent quite a few tweets on our Twitter about the situation in India. Inequality. First of all, hello, Anna. Anna is my colleague from Oxford. Yes, so it's very good. I saw just a glimpse of her face earlier on. So it's very good to see you, even though so briefly. I think inequality absolutely is very important. So the breakdown of social milieu of meaning making is to a great extent related to inequalities. Once the people are so much aware society is very unequal, of course you have very little trust. Why do you believe these rich people will have the same understanding as you? So that I think goes to a great extent to explain the situation in the US, right? And then you have precarious labor, and then you have structural inequalities. And of course, you don't have the structure, microstructure of trust. And the situation in India is devastating and reminds me actually of a lot what happened in Wuhan 1 year ago. One interesting phenomenon is this I call the hospital run, which is also actually a term invented in the Chinese media. Hospital run as an analogy to bank run. People rush to hospital, even though they know there is no oxygen, no bed in hospital, but the people just rush there and then turn hospital into a hub of infection, transinfection. How do we understand the situation like that? Is it because of the lack of grassroots healthcare system? So, I mean, then people say, oh, there's no oxygen. If you have grassroots healthcare system, there's still shortage of oxygen. Yes, but here what matters is not the oxygen per se. Here matters is the social channels social networks through which you can distribute very limited care resources most effectively. The shortage of oxygen is a shortage. By rushing to hospital only makes things worse. I mean, it's fully understandable why patients and the parents, I mean, the family members are doing that. But if you have a stable grassroots healthcare system, and at least you can tell people, you wait, you stay home, even you suffer, sorry. I mean, then that's because otherwise things become worse. In this regard, China did better. I mean, it was largely a success story. So this also reminded me to rethink the meaning of lockdown. When we had the conversation with Joshua, actually, I was still thinking lockdown as a medical response to, cut off the chain of transmission and isolate the source of the virus infection, etc. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. Lockdown succeeded in Wuhan, not for medical reasons. Lockdown means a total restructuring of the society. What is the key in lockdown? You need a large number of people who deliver food to every single household. You need the people knock on the door one by one to check the temperature twice a day. And then you have a system. On one hand, ban people from leaving home, but at the same time, you have hotlines that the people can call in case of emergency. And you need to respond. Of course, in Wuhan, it was completely chaos in the beginning. But fairly quickly, they established this new system, total reorganizing economic and social life. It is by doing that, then you start organizing how resources can be distributed and how it can be channeled. And in this process, of course, lots of confusion and the people fear, anxiety, that's all fully understandable and it should be expressed, right? But sometimes I think we also go too far, forgetting that in emergency crisis like that, you do need a kind of a shock. You do need the shock therapy because it is a shock in itself. So how can you have this shock? Here goes back to the question of equality and inequality. Chinese society did not benefit from its inequality. I mean, its inequality is widening, actually is very detrimental. But the Chinese, this quite a special, unique, very powerful authoritarian political system somehow can temporarily suppress the negative consequences of inequality. So therefore they can mobilize, have a total mobilization of society and a total restructuring of the social life for a shorter period of time, through lockdown. So I think that's the question is again, raise a very important theoretical and methodological question, meaning the relation between this very short, acute, exceptional event on one hand, and the long-term fundamental structural social distribution of basic resources, right? And if you don't have this basic grassroots organizational arrangement in place, you just cannot handle a huge crisis like that. The Chinese society, of course, despite inequality, but they have this, the residential committee, and they can have all this large number of cadres who were sent down, right? We know that the thousands of cadres were sent down into communities. I mean, they don't go to office every morning, they go to communities to work as food delivery workers. So if they don't have that kind of organizational channels, you cannot achieve what China achieved last year. Yeah, but in the long run, how we can develop a system which can respond more organically, more spontaneously, and let the society itself become more resilient. And that is needed to be studied further.
Thank you so much for all your questions, and to all of our speakers today, Professor Jiehong Jiang, Director of the Center for Chinese Visual Arts at Birmingham City University, Professor Xiang Biao, of the Professor of Social Anthropology at the Max Planck Institute and Oxford, and finally to Professor Micheal Berry, Professor of Chinese Literature at UCLA. I don't think there's any more questions, but just to give you a note that in the chat bar, Yelena, our project manager, has kindly posted a link if you would like to purchase the book online. We're just very grateful for your participation. Joshua, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we bring the session to a close?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we've also got Michael's post in the chat bar about the link. I had a very quick look, and it looks very interesting. I look forward to reading some of the posts, and also Xiang Biao posted something in a link in the chat bar as well. No, I would just use this opportunity to thank both Professor Berry and Professor Xiang for their participation. And thank you, Lauren. You have been a great chair all the way through, and
very easy work.
This is so I think I mean, overall, I hope that you would agree this is not the end of the project. On the other hand, it's actually a starting point of this for the future research as well. There's a lot for us to think about. I mean, the current situation in China is unthinkable. You know, with this 1.4 billion people, and they stay calm and stay stable. And UK was in such a mess, and US is not any better at all. It's because, I mean, simply democracy costs in many ways. And but this is, again, I would like to echo what Xiang Biao just said, that maybe it's the point for us to revisit what we used to define in terms of democracy and so on. So I think this is, you know, as colleagues and researchers working arts and humanities, this is the chance for us to revisit many things.
Great. So looking very much forward to further stimulating discussions in the future. This talk will be available on YouTube as well. If there's anything you missed, maybe you joined a few minutes late. So thanks once again to everyone for joining.
And thank you for Intellect for hosting this event, and for make this book possible.